We've just seen some interviews and now some pictures, the men and machines of the 1st Tactical Fighter Wing that's come back from sorties over Iraqi positions. Men who are very surprised by the little resistance that they met, very delighted to have made it back with no casualties reported. More pictures there as the jets continue moving through the airfield. One of the airmen had an intriguing thought about why they met so little resistance. He suggested to the correspondent who interviewed him that if the Iraqi jets had stayed on the ground, they would have been bombed by the multinational force. If they'd gone into the skies to meet the multinational force, they would have been shot down. Instead, it appears they fled north so that they could come back and fight another day. This is just one airman's speculation, of course, but an interesting idea to explain a little bit about why they met so little resistance in the air and only from ground positions. Here we're seeing more of the airbase somewhere in eastern Saudi Arabia. Defense Department regulations prohibit us telling you more about where the airfield is located.
And you also pointed out, or I think wanted to point out, Jonathan, the AAA they keep referring to.
That's right. There's a lot of terminology here that will be unfamiliar to us and to a lot of our viewers anyway. The AAA is anti-aircraft artillery. Those are the 3 A's the pilots are talking about. So far, they've been saying that they have been encountering some resistance from the AAAs, but not very much.
Lots of talk about jitters, one of them characterizing it as something that you might experience right before a big football game. He says he feels a lot better, though, and that all of them expressing the same sentiment, that they're very happy to be back on the ground, but that the mission has gone extremely well. And some very interesting descriptions from the air of what they saw as the AAA was coming up and as the bombs were bursting below and in the air above the city of Baghdad.
Well, Patrick, if we're going to compare it to a football game, these men are really speaking and behaving very much like it's just half-time. They're very satisfied with the way things have gone, relieved that they've come back, but they're very conscious, and you can see it in their faces, that it's not over yet.
While we watch one of the jets taking off, we should point out right now we are looking for, I don't think we see as yet, though, a taped message from Mikhail Gorbachev. We're looking for it. We don't see it as yet. We also have correspondence that we'll be going to shortly, but we want to stay with our unedited U.S. pool tape as we watch these, obviously taking off in daylight, a foggy day, but taking off on what would probably have been the second mission that we heard John Holloman and Bernard Shaw describing from the 14th floor where their location was in Baghdad. All right, we want to go now to an interesting bit of information for you. Saddam Hussein taped, apparently, a message that was carried on Radio Baghdad, Iraq's official news agency, carrying Saddam Hussein's letter to the Iraqi people, announcing the outbreak of war. Saddam Hussein describing the outbreak of hostilities as the, and we quote now, mother of all battles. Made no mention, though, of the success or otherwise of the Allied bombing runs against military and strategic targets within Iraq or in Kuwait. The letter that was read, at midnight, the treacherous had deceived, he said. The partner of evil, Bush, committed the great confrontation in the mother of all battles. He said that the Iraqis were expecting the Allied assault. The Iraqi leader expressed confidence that his forces would depose what he described as the dogs ruling the Gulf Arab states, such as Saudi Arabia, and neutralize what he terms as the evil in the White House. Francis Hardin has been standing by at the State Department. We have been hearing nothing but good comments from pilots and also from other venues, Francis Hardin, about the apparent Allied success. What are you hearing at State at this hour?
Well, right now we're hearing some reaction to the comments by the British Prime Minister John Major. His brief speech a short time ago was further testimony to the strength of the U.S.-led coalition in the desert. Britain has been firm from the beginning, both under the former Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, under Desert Shield, and now under the new Prime Minister, John Major, under Desert Storm. One sign of the closeness of that alliance, Major said that he had been informed on Tuesday of the timing of the attack. And another sign, he says he has an open line to the White House. From Israel, we heard just a little while ago from the Foreign Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel, of course, is one of the United States' strongest allies. We are hearing gratitude from them. Israel, of course, had been extremely concerned because of Saddam Hussein's promise to attack Israel. Also, Israeli leaders were edgy and probably still are about the U.S.-led alliance, which includes Arab states, includes Saudis and Kuwaitis, of course, and in a sense, Syria, but Syria is on a kind of a standby basis. They say they will defend, but they will not attack. And from another...
All right, Francis, we've got to interrupt you. The Saddam message is coming in now. Let's go to it. I believe there's translation on it, or we're going to provide it.
This is Baghdad, the Broadcasting Corporation of the masses, the great Iraqi people, ye great Iraqi people, ye sons of the great Arab nation, ye our sons in the brave armed forces, our Supreme Commander, the President Saddam Hussein, is appealing to the sons of our great people and our Arab nation and our armed forces. In the name of Allah, most merciful and compassionate. We said, fire, be cold and peaceful on Abraham, as God verily says in a quotation of the Quran. The great Iraqi people, the sons of our glorious nation, the brave in our courageous armed forces, people everywhere. Come on, stand up against evil, the infidels and their supporters and their allies. At 2:30 a.m. tonight, on the 16th of January, the treacherous foes and Bush, the Satan, has perpetrated his crime. He and the criminal Zionism. And the great battle has been initiated, the mother of all battles, between the triumphant truth with the support of God and the evil pushed by Satan, which will be beaten eventually, God willing. The brave, your sons and brothers in the Muslim faith, the sons of prophets, the faithful and the brave, who carried the torch and light of Islam and its guidance to all humanity. These sons of yours, they were bravely confronting the foes because God supported them and guided them, because there is a lot of faith in their breasts. The criminals are not ashamed of themselves, and that criminal, the traitor, the custodian of the two holy mosques and the traitor of the Islamic nation, who and his like, he means King Fahd, will rot in hell. He is a treacherous criminal, King Fahd. God is with us, dear brethren. God is always the patient, the steadfast, and he will support them in any case, with the gravity of the conflict and the steadfastness of the believers. Success will become possible, so that the whole nation will overthrow the thrones and the presidencies that have been traitors to it. These traitors will be overthrown after the defeat of the Satan in the White House, Bush. And in this poisonous hornet nest of confrontation. Criminal Tel Aviv will also be beaten, and Palestine will be liberated, and its people will take their lands back. And the Golan Heights will be liberated, and the Arab individual will be liberated everywhere. As long as the oppressors and the unjust continue in their conflict. God make this fire falling on Iraqis to be peace and cold on those who are perpetrating jihad. God is great. God is great. God is great. Victory is there with the support of God, and the criminals will rot in hell. This is Baghdad.
Okay, that was the radio address that was carried. You heard the translation, of course. Saddam Hussein addressing his people. That was carried on Radio Baghdad earlier. It was interesting, I thought, at the outset of it, that we heard a jet actually going over. No idea whose jet. A jet, though, I distinctly heard the sound of a jet going overhead as that address began, exhorting his people, the sons and daughters of Iraq, to continue with their faith, and some very colorful language in there used by Saddam Hussein. Treacherous forces that were wreaking the fire upon them. Bush, the Satan. This was the mother of all battles that had been begun, but through it all, Saddam Hussein maintains that the truth will triumph against the evil. Faithful are carrying the torch of Islam. One might preclude at that again, trying to exhort a holy war, the jihad. In fact, the word jihad was used toward the end of the address. But here, you could suggest that he is trying to call together the Arab world, and rather than standing alone in this, referring numerous times to the criminals, also the traitor King Fahd, for at this point housing the Allied forces on airways, that the king will rot in hell, God is with us, poisonous hornet's nest, putting together Tel Aviv, and the Golan Heights will be taken back. All of this carried on Baghdad radio not all that long ago. Saddam Hussein making that address, as I say, what clearly sounded like a jet going overhead. We have been waiting for about 10 minutes now for Mikhail Gorbachev, who taped an address, and that will be should be coming to us. We simply are waiting for it right now, and as soon as 15 minutes from now, I am told now, that we can look forward to the Mikhail Gorbachev address to come in. So let's go now to Jonathan Mann.
Patrick, a war of words coming from Baghdad, also a much more real war of men and machines. For more now on the changing military situation, let's go to Jeff Levine, standing by live at the Pentagon. Jeff?
Good morning, Jonathan. We understand from Pentagon officials we might be getting our first look at some combat video a bit later today. The warplanes involved in Desert Storm were all equipped with cameras to record their assaults. This material will be put together in the first phase in Saudi Arabia, will be satellited back here to the Pentagon. In fact, that's probably going on now. Pentagon officials will be going through a security review, of course, of that material, and ultimately they will provide the news media with a highlight reel, and as we say, we should be getting that a bit later today. Pentagon officials, of course, feel that they have a very positive story to tell, and earlier, Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney painted a very positive picture.
I will simply say that the preliminary reports we have received in terms of the success of the operation, and that includes the possibility of casualties, have been very, very encouraging. The operation appears to have gone very well.
Now, sources in the Pentagon say that during the attacks, perhaps all of Iraq's 100 Air Force bases were damaged or destroyed. Among the other targets of the raids were chemical weapons facilities, nuclear weapons facilities, and of course the Scud missile sites. We don't know if there have been any Allied casualties at this time. We might find out more about that a bit later. There's going to be a briefing approximately 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time this morning here at the Pentagon, and we do hope that Secretary of Defense Cheney will be here, as well as Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Colin Powell. And we'll, of course, have a fuller picture of what happened in Desert Storm later this morning. Jeff Levine, CNN, reporting live from the Pentagon.
Jeff Levine, let me bring this bit of information to our viewers now that we are getting from eastern Saudi Arabia. Multinational forces have destroyed apparently 2 air bases in Iraqi-occupied Kuwait. Iraqi troops, though, have been shelling the multinational forces on the Kuwait-Saudi border as of early Thursday. This is according to the Kuwaiti Ministry of Information. Iraqi artillery in Kuwait were shelling U.S.-led forces, according to the official, who added that some Iraqi troops have begun to actually surrender. And a quote here, "It is not too heavy, but I haven't got the complete information yet." This is again from the Information Ministry. He could not say whether the multinational forces were retaliating or whether the shelling was continuing, but this would certainly lead one to believe that we are now talking about some kind of ground activity, which would be a first bit of information on anything taking place on the ground. Thus far, it has all been an air campaign. The official had said earlier that the tanks were shelling one another. U.S. officials in Dhahran, meanwhile, would not say whether there was any fighting in the border area, which means that they will not confirm any ground activity at this point. Back to the Kuwaiti minister, also said that Kuwaiti aircraft, Skyhawks, Mirage fighters, had been participating in the multinational attack as it went on. So we have what could be the first indication of something actually happening on the ground, involving ground forces, something other than airstrikes out of Saudi Arabia involving the 4 forces that have been described. Peter Arnett, we hope you've had a bit of a nap. Peter Arnett is awake and in Baghdad, and give us a picture right now, Peter.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, it's noon in Baghdad. It's 9.5 hours since the beginning of the massive bombing raids here on the city. You mentioned earlier, when hearing the statement attributed to Saddam Hussein, read about 2:30 this morning, you'd heard a plane in the air and you wondered whose plane it was. Well, I'm pretty sure it was one of the many U.S. planes we heard. The Pentagon is saying that they knocked out all of the 530 aircraft of the Iraqi Air Force. I think that is pretty well true. U.S. planes own the skies, certainly over Baghdad, and they've been attacking with impunity. We've seen 3 bombing attacks in the last hour or so, but they are to the south and fairly distant, but they're clearly happening. The damage assessments are limited for us, too, because we're still here in the hotel, in the Al Rashid Hotel. We have not been permitted to move out in the city to any distance at this point. Not even very. No, I haven't been permitted to take cameras when we have gone. We can see in the distance what seems to be a chemical refinery or an oil refinery burning with black smoke. I do believe that the BBC is reporting that the Defense Ministry was hit by several bombs. But the skyline of Baghdad that we can see, the government monuments and the communications towers, are still standing today. Patrick?
Yes, Peter, I understand that you heard the Saddam Hussein address. I'm wondering any observations from you on what we heard. We just aired it here a short time ago on CNN.
I did just hear the actual text of the speech. I was not surprised at its content. In fact, Saddam Hussein was seen by one of our CNN staffers today, Nick Robinson, when Nick went over to the Iraqi TV station in Baghdad to try and get some kind of transmissions working to send video pictures. Saddam Hussein was there. Nick says that the leader looked grim and resolute. Now, in his address, Saddam Hussein did call for support from the world and from the Arab world, the world at large, to repel the aggressors. The language showed little hint of any timidity, and it seems that at this point he is sticking to his guns literally, and there is no sense of him backing down at all. We have had no word from that. There was an official Iraqi statement from the foreign ministry earlier, and it said that President Bush will regret the attack. The Americans and their allies will be taught a lesson. That's what they're saying here.
Peter, just as a sidelight here, did you also, when you heard it, and I'm wondering if we should just leave it as an observation, I heard a jet going overhead while that tape played. What do we make of that? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, Well, I mentioned earlier, I guess you didn't pick it up, or maybe you didn't receive my comment, but I'm sure that jet you heard going over was an American jet, because from our observations, I don't think that any planes the Iraqis seem to have gotten off the ground. We saw no dogfights in the sky, and I think it must have been an American plane going ahead. It's clear to us here that the attack, the massive airstrikes came as pretty much of a surprise to the Iraqis. The city had not been closed down. Lights were on in the streets. The sirens of warning came 15, 20 minutes after the actual raid started here. So I think the element of surprise was gained by the multinational forces in the opening of this war. Patrick?
All right, Peter Arnett, rested, we hope, somewhat after a long night as the initial surge of this attack got underway. Thank you. Jonathan?
Patrick, let's go now to Charles Bierbauer, who's standing by live at the White House. What can you tell us, Charles?
Well, Jonathan, President Bush, in his remarks from the Oval Office during the evening, pointed out that nothing had persuaded Saddam Hussein to change his ways. And in listening to this radio address that the Iraqi president has given a short time ago, it was certainly anything but submissive. Saddam Hussein took on everyone who was arrayed against him, starting with President Bush and working his way around his own country's perimeter, the Saudis, and of course raising again the issue of Palestine, saying that he would liberate Palestine and the Golan Heights, the Golan being the area of Syria that is held by the Israelis, still trying to drum up support from his fellow Arabs, obviously. The tenor of Saddam Hussein's remarks suggests that he's perfectly prepared to absorb this first strike and perhaps to continue absorbing aerial bombardment by the U.S. and its allies. That was certainly one of the scenarios which was anticipated by the Bush administration in trying to calculate just what would happen and what would have to be done to evict the Iraqis from Kuwait. Indeed, if we're now hearing reports of some ground fighting or some ground activity being conducted by the Iraqis, that would be the first of that. And in terms of actually moving Saddam's force, the bulk of his force is ground troops. That is what has been deemed likely to be the most costly in terms of effort and manpower to get those hundreds of thousands of Iraqis out of Kuwait. That's an element of the battle that has not yet been joined. Jonathan?
Charles, as you mentioned, the fighting really is going on, continuing on the ground, it would seem. What is happening at the White House? Is there any activity there to try and put out feelers to Iraq and see if maybe there has been a change of heart, if Saddam Hussein now feels differently now that he's seen the full might of the multinational force?
Well, there's no activity that we see. There is always activity in the deep recesses of the White House where the vigil never stops. The National Security Council is situated here and has what is known as the Situation Room, or sit room for short, where they keep an eye on things. The public areas and the official areas are pretty well shut down for the night. There's no one left in the press staff. There are a few of us press still lingering on here. The president is likely to have an early breakfast meeting. We understand that Secretaries Baker and Cheney, the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, are due in around 7:30 for breakfast. We believe with the National Security Advisor, General Scowcroft, and probably the president joining in that too. That will be their first overnight assessment. It does take a bit of time to get a handle on just how much damage has been done, how effective these bombing runs have been, though certainly what we are hearing from the pilots coming back is that they feel they have been quite successful and certainly encountered no resistance. But again, the question is, what kind of resistance will there be on the ground?
Charles Bierbauer at the White House, thanks very much. Patrick?
All right, thank you, Jonathan. We have a guest we'd like to talk with briefly. David Bolton is the director of the Royal United Services Institution. I hope it's an institution or institute. It's a think tank of ex-servicemen, and he is an expert on military tactics. Welcome. I wonder if you might give us an initial assessment of what has happened over the last few hours.
Yes, I think there are 3 points that come to me. First of all, that tactical air surprise was certainly achieved by these magnificently coordinated attacks, the supremacy of high technology in going for a wide range of different targets. Secondly, that a firm indication of resolve of the international allied force to prosecute this war. And I think the third element is that by evidence of this, the aim must now be to prosecute that war as resolutely as possible in order both to minimize casualties and in order to win the peace, so that we keep that in mind. My final point, I think, is an initial reaction, is a sense of thankfulness that those who launched these attacks have returned safely.
We have had some reports that some Iraqi pilots were able to get off the ground but then flew directly north. Analyze that.
Well, I think that there could be two reasons for this. First of all, there is the sense of trying to safeguard the aircraft, particularly if launched, and by virtue of going for ground control systems, if they were air defense aircraft, they were not then being directed onto enemy, and therefore they were trying to see them in the dark and unable to do so. So the instinct of self-preservation overrode whatever control might have been occurring, and off they went. The other element is going back, I think, to the 73 Arab-Israeli war, that many of the Egyptians then flew south in order to protect their air force should it be required later. So those are the two possibilities, I think, in looking at that particular situation.
I am told that you have met a number of Iraqi military. Give us an idea, if you would, please. What is the mindset of the typical military in Iraq?
Oh, very difficult to define at this stage. You're talking about a country that has been under the most severest autocratic role for 22 years, where people dare not speak frankly one to the other. Montgomery's dictum that morale is the greatest single factor in modern war comes to mind. Now, there is talk that perhaps when there is confusion, and a great deal of confusion, this might embolden some close to Saddam Hussein to perhaps settle old scores and recognize what might occur if Saddam himself is not removed. So I think that in seeing this expression of resolve, the magnificence of the coordinated attacks and the might of Allied air power, this might encourage some of those and embolden them to remove Saddam Hussein from his position and bring peace to that part of the world more quickly. But we don't know, and it might well be that the scores are settled at a lower level.
Mr. Bolton, we've had some initial reports here that some Iraqi forces actually along the Kuwait-Saudi border have apparently actually surrendered at this point. I am wondering, could that turn into a snowball? And also, well, if Saddam Hussein were dead at this point, he's apparently very much alive because we just heard a radio address, but if he were dead, how fast would all of this fall apart? Or maybe it would not?
First, let's take the question of the units. The people who have been easing out over the border, you can't call it a flood, until now, have only numbered about 300 or 400 over the period of 5 months. The reason being, of course, because the retribution that could be exacted on them and their families is horrendous. Now, however, I come back to my point of morale, and if units are deserting, then this gives rise to suggestions that, faced with the prospect of war, that the so-called battle-hardened Iraqi soldiers are in fact battle-weary and battle-weakened and want no more of it, particularly when faced with the prospect of operations over a 24-hour period, perhaps even non-stop, and horrendous bombardments of modern technology being brought to bear upon them. Whether this reflects all units or only some of them, of course, is a matter of conjecture. It'd be interesting to see how effective the reports were that perhaps the Republican Guard, the elite of the Iraqi army, had been affected by the bombing. Some argue that they were actually targeted. On the question of what might happen post-Saddam, first of all, I think it is important that the war aims are explicit, that we, the Allies, are not seeking to destroy Iraq at all. It is a question of removing Saddam Hussein and his coterie. Under those circumstances, you could have officers loyal to the overall interest of Iraq that might exact a vengeance on Saddam, or it could be some from the Ba'ath Party, the Tikritis, who might seek to do so. If they do that, then one could feel that the reason for it might primarily be to save Iraq itself, and therefore they would seek to come to some arrangement very quickly to prevent any further carnage.
All right, hang on, if you would, please, David Bolton, because you have some interesting things to say, and we want to continue. Let's go briefly, though, to Jonathan Mann. Jonathan has some more information.
Patrick, we're going to go now to Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, and John Sweeney of CNN, who's standing by live. John?
Jonathan, CNN has learned a Saudi general scheduled to hold a briefing in an hour and a half or so will reveal details of an Iraqi rocket and artillery attack on oil storage facilities in the border town of Khafji. And this attack reportedly took place shortly after the air attack on Kuwait and Iraq. The Iraqis reportedly opened up with 120 millimeter artillery fire and rockets. It's reported that several storage tanks in the area were struck, and some are reportedly still on fire. There were no casualties reported, and the Saudi is expected to deny earlier broadcast reports that the Saudi army ran in the face of that artillery and rocket attack. Again, there were no casualties reported. A couple of those tanks, at least, are reportedly still on fire. Khafji, you may remember, is the border town between Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, where many Kuwaiti refugees crossed into Saudi Arabia early on in this crisis. Jonathan?
John, we now have this report. Kuwaiti radio now says that Allied ground forces are moving towards Kuwait. Allied ground forces, we're learning now, are moving towards Kuwait. The latest report to come in, ABC Television is also reporting that a military air base outside of Baghdad has suffered a direct hit. The latest details coming in just now. Patrick?
All right, Jonathan, we have a guest, David Bolton, who is a military analyst and an expert, the director of the Royal United Services Institute, a think tank of ex-servicemen. And did you hear, Mr. Bolton, that we are getting a report now the ground forces are on their way toward Kuwait?
Yes, I think that is significant. It gives an indication that there is confidence of air supremacy, particularly localized and possibly extending right over Iraq. For those who know the area, incidentally, I would assume that the airfield near Baghdad is the old British base of Habaniyah. It's sad to think that that has been attacked or needed to be attacked, but thank heaven that it has been under these circumstances. I believe that we will now see pressure being exerted along a broad front, and that the Allies will be able to exploit whatever weaknesses might appear in the defenses, much as you have indicated by the possibility that some of the forward Iraqi forces lack resolution in defending their positions.
Now, Mr. Bolton, it is very interesting because so many analysts prior to this had said that the air campaign would go on for quite some time, and that we might even be talking days or even into weeks before any serious ground movement would take place. And yet here we are, approaching a little over, what, 9 plus some hours since the initial airstrikes over Baghdad, and we're getting reports of ground movement. What does this tell you, this telescoping, this compression?
I think that once initial air supremacy or superiority, even if it was localized, was achieved, the actions had to be concurrent and not consecutive. You don't take it piecemeal. It is important that you exert pressure across a wide front to ensure that you test morale and resolution, that you make sure that your tactical intelligence is refined, and you put the Iraqi forces and their command system and their logistic resupply under the utmost pressure. Mm-hmm. This can be achieved without necessarily risking tremendous casualties on one's own point, unless there is the possibility of a breakthrough, and then we will see some movement. Go on, yes?
There has been an awful lot of talk, again, prior to all of this, a lot of talk about the technological superiority of the Allied forces led by primarily the United States in this case, and but that the enemy should not be taken lightly, that it is, after all, the fourth largest army in the world, and that it would be a bloody battle. Why are we seeing what we are seeing thus far? Very little resistance and, as we say, a speeding up of the schedule for ground forces.
I think that there are two reactions to that. First of all, there has been a great deal of speculation about what might or might not happen. I would hope that we no longer try to second-guess the commanders on the spot. Secondly, I think that it is early days yet. There is still 500,000 men or more on either side, perhaps going to be enjoined in battle. That is horrendous in the type of violence that might yet still be forthcoming. The military dictum, of course, is that one plans for the worst and hopes for the best. And I believe that we are seeing that perhaps, at least in the early stages, the technology is, in the battle of high technology on the part of the Allied forces, set against the mass of the Iraqi forces, that at least initially, high technology seems to be winning. We hope that higher training, higher resolve, higher morale will prevail in the end.
Thank you, David Bolton, insightful and educating of the Royal United Services Institute in London. Thank you for joining us tonight, sir.
Thank you.
Jonathan?
Patrick, we now have the taped message from Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev.
Американские вооруженные силы совместно с войсковыми частями Великобритании, Саудовской Аравии и других государств нанесли удары по военным, некоторым промышленным,
on military and some industrial objects in Iraq,
иракских вооруженных сил.
On the locations of the Iraqi forces. Such a tragic turn was provoked by Iraqi leadership's refusal to follow the demands of the world community and withdraw its forces from Iraq, from Kuwait. In the beginning of the Iraqi aggression, the Soviet Union did all it could to solve an acute international conflict by peaceful means. To the very last minute, we took energetic effort in order to prevent the war by political means to get independence back to Kuwait. Having gotten about an hour in advance from Mr. Baker the report on the decisions they made, I put the proposal before President Bush to take additional measures through the direct contact with Saddam Hussein to get an unpostponable announcement of Iraqi withdrawal from Kuwait. At the same time, I ordered our ambassador in Baghdad to get in touch with the president of Iraq and let him know about my talk with George Bush, and let him know that in the interest of Iraqi people, in the interest of peace in the region, let him announce that he is ready to withdraw from Kuwait. That would let avert war and save Iraq great losses and devastation. I expressed hope that being judged by the high interest by the people, Saddam Hussein would follow that only saving step. That same night, we also appealed to the leaders of many influential countries, including France, China, Great Britain, Germany, India, Italy, to the heads of most Arabic states,
и параллельные шаги в целях локализации конфликта.
Combined efforts to localize the conflict and prevent it from spreading.
Какими тяжелыми последствиями
Realizing what consequences for the Arabic people, for American people, for the whole international situation,
массы войск и современной
what losses it can bring.
Мы выражаем глубокое сожаление, что не удалось
We express our deep
военного столкновения.
sorrow that the military confrontation could not be averted.
Еще раз подчеркну,
So I'm ready to emphasize one more time,
военными средствами
we did
конфликт.
everything possible to avert the conflict.
Что среди находящихся
I want to inform you
в Ираке советских
that
людей
among the Soviet people who are still in Iraq, there's been no casualties.
может быть уверен, что
The Soviet people can be
будет
sure
принимать все меры для
that the Soviet leadership
войны
will take all measures
восстановления мира, взаимодействуя с другими
to
странами
stop war as soon as possible,
Объединенных
and it'll go on cooperating with other countries and the United Nations.
There we have Mikhail Gorbachev issuing a statement, his regret about the outbreak of war in the Middle East at a time when his own country is very close, or moving ever closer, to civil war. Standing by to tell us more about the situation in Moscow and the situation in Moscow for the Middle East is CNN Bureau Chief there, Steve Hurst. Steve?
Yes, Jonathan. No real surprises in what Mr. Gorbachev had to say. It was interesting to hear him say that he had been contacted by the White House about an hour before the operation began, if we understood him correctly, and that he had asked the White House to make one last effort to avoid conflict. He didn't say what the White House answer was, but obviously the answer was we're not waiting any longer. He also said that he was going to make every effort through diplomatic channels to localize the conflict, as he put it, and he told his Soviet audience that among the Soviet people, I'm quoting him here, still in Iraq, there were no casualties. He ended his very, very brief remarks saying that he would do everything personally to take all measures to stop the war as soon as he could. Jonathan?
Steve, let me ask you this. Of course, there's a lot going on in Lithuania right now. There's a lot going on all through the Soviet Union. How much is this a sideshow to Gorbachev, given the problems he has to face domestically?
Well, it's very much a sideshow, but also Mr. Gorbachev knows that if the world becomes embroiled in a larger conflict, that it's going to have very direct consequences on the Soviet Union, particularly in the economy. The Soviets are already having great problems with their oil industry, unable to meet demands when they could have been reaping a windfall in this Persian Gulf crisis. At the same time, I think that being a bit cynical, we see Mr. Gorbachev and his military using the world's focus on the Persian Gulf as a smokescreen to carry out some rather draconian steps against Lithuania right now. The other Baltic republics and some of the other breakaway republics are fearing that they might be next with the world's attention turned to a war in the Persian Gulf.
Well, what is going to happen next, do you think? Not to shift our attention too far away, but the world, certainly here in the United States, people have been concentrating so much on the Gulf that they do seem, in fact, to be not noticing or forgetting all of what's going on in Lithuania. What is the next step for Gorbachev there? Is the smokescreen going to allow him to crack down ever harder?
Well, I think it depends very much, Jonathan, on how long this war lasts. If our attention is glued on Iraq with these riveting reports by CNN correspondents out of Baghdad much longer, I think that Mr. Gorbachev can move without the world paying much attention. If that doesn't last that long, I think that the world attention will go back, at least partially, to events in Lithuania, the Baltics, and the other breakaway republics. So I suppose what I'm saying is if he is going to use this as a true smokescreen and is going to take those draconian measures he seems to be threatening, I think that he will do it very quickly, knowing, as we all know, that this war is moving very quickly.
CNN Moscow Bureau Chief Steve Hurst, thanks very much. Pat?
All right, Jonathan, a couple of items to bring you up to date on. Out of London this word, Iraqi artillery has attacked an oil refinery on the Gulf Coast in Saudi Arabia. This is according to BBC reports. citing British military sources in Riyadh as a source for their information. BBC reporter saying that there are unconfirmed reports that U.S. forces, including Cobra helicopters, Harrier attack aircraft, those are the jets that fly very much like a helicopter, where they can literally stop in midair and drop down like a helicopter onto the ground, and A-10 tank busters were retaliating against an attack. Morale among Allied forces in the Gulf region said to be high, according to the BBC reporter here. Kuwaiti official earlier had said that the Allied forces had destroyed the only 2 Iraqi air bases in occupied Kuwait, and that Iraq was shelling the multinational forces on the Kuwait-Saudi border. Also, new information coming to us that Iraqi soldiers are apparently removing their uniforms and putting on civilian clothes. We have some reports of desertion from the ranks of the Kuwaiti or the Iraqi forces. Also, this story, Iraq said on Thursday that it had shot down 14 Allied planes raiding Kuwait and Iraq. The statement by the Iraqi military command is quoting Baghdad radio, saying that the planes were downed in the dogfights that they say took place with Iraqi planes or by anti-aircraft fire, the AAA that we heard referred to by some of the pilots in the unedited U.S. tape, quoting, "Our brave Eagles pilots and air defense men have so far shot down 14 enemy planes of various kinds." That's a quote. This is hinting also that the presidential palace Saddam Hussein lived in was targeted by the Allies. The statement says that among the planes hit were three of them shot down by the Presidential Guard in Baghdad. We have not had a report from our correspondents in Baghdad on this, so we cannot by any stretch of the imagination confirm such a report. We will certainly put the question to them the next time we talk with them, which will be soon. Right now, though, we want to talk with Richard Blivestone, who is in Jerusalem, and get a perspective from that vantage point now. Richard.
Patrick, life is slowly returning to normal here in Jerusalem. People are venturing out in the streets in greater and greater numbers. Stores have been opening as we approach the noon hour, and the traffic, unfortunately, is returning to normal. The threat the Israelis seem to feel has diminished, if it is not gone altogether. There is something else that keeps the Israelis worried, and that's the threat of intensified uprisings in East Jerusalem and the occupied territories. There are curfews in effect there. And I wonder, Patrick, since I am on one end of the Middle East spectrum, if I might talk with my old colleague Peter Arnett in Baghdad. He and I served together in another war for another organization.
Bly, if that was a question to me, could you repeat it? I was going over my notes and just didn't pick it up. I'm sorry.
Well, Peter, I think one thing that, of course, it makes us very curious is have you heard anything, or do you have anything to substantiate this report, apparently on Baghdad radio, that 14 Allied jets have been shot down?
Well, it's the first news we've had of that. Of course, the planes, many of them were flying very high, and there was an enormous amount of anti-aircraft flak going into the sky. I saw what I think were several surface-to-air missiles. There was lots of this AAA anti-aircraft artillery going up there. Now, a European who was with the peace group, who was at a camp near the presidential palace, has just told us that there was enormous anti-aircraft fire from the presidential palace, but he didn't see anything that looked like a hit on a plane. Sorry, I can't help you anymore on that, Bly, but there was a lot of shooting from Baghdad up into the sky during today.
Thanks, Peter, but one thing that has piqued my curiosity, hearing John Holloman and Bernie Shaw use the term rolling thunder to those who covered the Vietnam War, that has a very specific and a very remarkable meaning. Maybe you would want to tell our viewers, as one who has seen more of them than most people, what rolling thunder means.
Well, rolling thunder, in my recollection, was the air campaign against North Vietnam. It was rolling thunder. It was escalated as the years went by. The idea was to intimidate the North Vietnamese leadership into pulling out of the war in the South and basically signing a peace agreement. I made the comment earlier this morning during the massive raids on Baghdad and raids that we'd heard were taking all over the country that they seemed to me more like the massive raids at the end of the Vietnam War in 1972 on Hanoi and other targets, which essentially ended the Vietnam War. And I pointed out that this was at the beginning of this particular conflict, so there was no rolling thunder here. It just came all at once, Bly.
Yeah, I think there are probably very few people in the West who have ever been on the ground when one of these saturation bombing attacks takes place. In the early 70s, I had the chance to interview some Viet Cong and North Vietnamese prisoners who'd been in bunkers and had it happen to them several times, and they said it was horrible. I remember that one of them described being caught in what the Air Force called an arc-light strike, a massive strike of B-52 bombers, as being like dead for 3 minutes. He said that people went out of their minds with fear, their chests were crushed by the concussion.
Yes, well, that's it. When I heard, Bly, that there were several divisions of the Republican Guard, the elite divisions, decimated, according to the Pentagon, in Kuwait, and possibly by B-52s. I remember when I was at Khe Sanh, in the besieged Marine base in Khe Sanh, west of Hue, and which was surrounded by reportedly 40 to 60,000 North Vietnamese tough troops, and the B-52 strikes came in day after day, and they just churned up the ground to great depths, and after several weeks just stopped that attack cold and killed thousands of North Vietnamese. I would not have wanted to be anywhere near Kuwait when those B-52s, if indeed they did, were bombing in the early hours of this morning those men on the sands.
They were certainly a visual spectacular for those who were lucky enough to be far away. I'm also reminded today, Peter, that I believe just as I was leaving you, regrettably, last Saturday, by the way, my heart has been bleeding for all you in Baghdad since I left until late last night when I started eating my heart out. Just before I left, I believe I was told by one of you that you'd been to see a high-ranking Iraqi official talking about logistics if wartime came, and that he said, oh, they'll never reach Baghdad. That has turned out to be manifestly short-sighted. How are the Iraqis talking now, those who you've been able to talk with? Do they admit that they were short-sighted?
Bly, you're right. You've been here much longer than I have in the last few years, and the Iraqis are talking at the official level, of course. It is belligerent talk with the president saying this is the mother of all battles, which has started and the victory is near, and the foreign ministry saying that President Bush will regret the attack, etc., etc. The officials we come into contact during the day, the middle-level officials, the foreign ministry, the information ministry, they have been fairly scarce today. But one of them did tell one of my colleagues, he admitted that, quote, this is serious, unquote. And here in Iraq, for an official to mention that an event is serious, that is in this context, means that they are shaken by it. I've had the impression in the days that I've been here, there's been increasing tension and realization amongst members of the government that President Bush, the multinational forces, indeed the world, was serious about its demands that Iraq leave from Kuwait, and they've had ample evidence in the last 10.5 hours now that these threats, these intentions have been realized with their full force, Bly.
Yeah, I must say that I have been amazed, even having been there so recently, at the kind of latitude and the kind of freedom you all have had to report, where our correspondents in Saudi Arabia, our correspondents here in Israel, of course, have censorship and other limitations put on them. I remember very well the 6 weeks I put in Iraq at the beginning of the Iran-Iraq War. Of course, Iraq went into that one very confident that it was going to win, and very soon found out that it was going to have a very difficult time. The correspondents in those days were almost jailed in the hotel, given very little help. And on one occasion, I asked an information officer about the name that the Iraqis were using for this battle against the Iranians, this war against the Iranians. They were calling it the Qadisiyah. after a battle, I think, some 7 centuries ago in which Arabs beat Persians. And the information officer then said, well, I don't think I can tell you that. Even a historical question he was not ready to answer. So you're a little bit lucky.
I'm reluctant to query authorities too deeply on this phenomenon of continued communications out of here. I think it is a gesture to the communications phenomenon in the world that every country wants its say. It wants its story across. And CNN, we're in the unique position of being able to communicate from most countries in the world. So we basically, in our coverage, help to tell their story. We also give our own observations, as we've been doing in the last 10 hours. But maybe the government realizes that we are a vehicle for them to put their viewpoint across, and I believe that all sides of these stories should be told, and let's hope they continue to maybe see it that way. Blythe?
Well, Peter, keep up that tremendous work, and the very best to all of you over there. I'll sign off now. Maybe we can talk again later. In the meantime, I'm Richard Blystone, reporting live from CNN in Jerusalem, and back to you, Atlanta.
Richard in Jerusalem, Peter in Baghdad. Take care of yourselves and stick around. We'll be coming back to you later. But while we've been talking and reflecting on some of those interesting thoughts you've raised, the military activity has, of course, been continuing, and so has business activity around the world. Let's go now to Stuart Varney at the Business News Desk in New York. Stuart?
Well, Jonathan, so far, the oil market clearly likes the early results of the war. Britain's North Sea crude oil, trading in London, has fallen dramatically in price. It's down $5.50 a barrel, back at $23.50, and that, by the way, is below the price before the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. More on the oil market, closer to home this time. American oil companies, Mobil, Chevron, Arco, and Conoco, announcing they will freeze wholesale prices of gasoline. Mobil for the indefinite future, Chevron and Arco for at least 7 days. That's an effort to discourage panic buying and speculation. Now, stocks around the world clearly buoyed by the apparent success of the initial airstrikes. The Tokyo stock market had its 10th best day ever, up 4% with a gain of over 1,000 points on the Nikkei average. Other Pacific Rim stock markets took their cue from Tokyo. Hong Kong's market gained 3% overnight. Sydney in Australia, the market there gained also about 3%. Singapore really soared. It virtually took off with a gain of 5% overnight. The London stock market just opening, actually it's been open now for about an hour and a half. It is up 33 points on the FT 100, and other European markets are also opening sharply higher. The Paris Bourse, for example, gained 6% of the opening bell, and the Frankfurt market gained 5.5%. Massive gains for stocks so far today. Treasury bond prices also trade in London, and they are sharply higher. The 30-year bellwether U.S. government bond is up nearly 2 points. That's a massive gain on the credit markets. The yield all the way down to 8.22%. War news, though, pushing the dollar lower against all the major currencies around the world. At the moment, the dollar is down about 3 yen. It's down 2 pfennigs against the German mark and down about 2.5 cents against the British pound. We will have more financial news as it develops. Until then, I'm Stuart Varney at the Business News Desk in New York.
For a wrap-up on events thus far in the war in the Gulf region, CNN's Charles Crawford.
As the Pentagon released the first video of last-minute preparations for Operation Desert Storm, a second strike by U.S. warplanes hit the Iraqi capital.
It's happened once at night. Now it's daytime. It's very foggy outside, and I'm going to let you hear the sounds as I hear them out the window.
The daylight strike over Baghdad and attacks that followed apparently were less destructive than the initial raid. But they appeared to bolster the Pentagon claim that Iraqi air defenses were knocked out by the first wave of fighters and bombers. The Pentagon says about 100 Iraqi air bases now have been rendered useless. Also destroyed, Iraqi Scud and Al-Hussein missiles that could have posed a threat to Allied forces in Saudi Arabia and Israel. CNN correspondents in Baghdad say the strikes in the Iraqi capital were precisely targeted.
We can see intact all of the important shrines, the monuments, the buildings that are so important to Baghdad.
The only Iraqi response so far has been verbal, not military. Saddam Hussein, alive in the Iraqi capital, vowed on Iraqi radio to strike back twice as hard at the U.S.-led alliance. But if Pentagon reports are true, President Hussein may have lost another key retaliatory weapon, the elite Republican Guard. The force that carried out the August 2nd invasion of Kuwait is said to have taken substantial losses in the first attack. However, Kuwait remains in Iraqi hands. The apparent success of the early hours of Operation Desert Storm has failed to win over many of the U.S. citizens opposed to the Persian Gulf policy. Raucous anti-war rallies erupted in several California cities, including San Francisco. The State Highway Patrol was forced to issue an advisory telling motorists not to travel to the Bay City. Charles Crawford, CNN, reporting.
Hello, everyone. I'm Molly McCoy.
And I'm Rick Moore as our coverage of the war in the Persian Gulf continues. Fast, furious, and frequent. And we have a story just in that, if you can follow with me, we will be reporting this from the wire services. There is no confirmation at this point, but Baghdad Radio is reporting that Iraqi anti-aircraft units shot down 14 attacking warplanes during this morning's raids by U.S.-led forces. So far, the Pentagon has not released any information on possible downing of U.S. planes. There is also no word from the Pentagon of casualties. Molly?
CNN's Peter Arnett is, of course, in Baghdad. He's been reporting on the conflict there ever since it began. Peter, can you clarify perhaps this report just repeated by Rick Moore, and what can you tell us about the situation in Baghdad at this hour?
Well, just as we speak, Molly, the U.S. planes are flying over the city. They're not bombing at this immediate moment, but we can't see them, but we can hear their jet noises. Just a few seconds before that, we heard a series of bombings, runs. There must have been 15, 20 explosions, possibly 10 or 15 miles away from downtown Baghdad where we are. Since about 11 o'clock, there's been just a series of renewed bombing raids. This is probably the fourth or fifth. Now, it did start here. The time here is 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The raids did start on Baghdad at 2:30 in the morning Baghdad time, and there was a break for about 5 hours. But they have resumed again, and damage that we can confirm in the city. There's an oil refinery in the Tigris River on an island that has been pretty much destroyed. There is a chemical plant, or maybe it looks like a chemical plant in the distance that has been burning for some time. And the BBC is reporting, and we can't confirm it, that the Defense Ministry has taken 3 direct hits. But I can tell you there is a lot of activity in the sky here, and the U.S. owns the sky. There is no resistance at this point from any Iraqi planes. Even anti-aircraft seems to be diminished, anti-aircraft fire. So the war is certainly still on over Baghdad, Molly.
Count for us again. How many rounds of Allied forces attacking Baghdad have you counted so far?
That is difficult to estimate because we hear planes come in, we hear bombing, but it has to be in the dozens at this point. Where it seems to be 3, 5 planes coming in. We've had one plane flew over the hotel earlier. But what is happening here is that it's just not, it's the outskirts of Baghdad too. It's beyond the city itself. Right now there's multiple bombings. To me, if I didn't know better, I'd say there were B-52s, but I'm sure they're probably not. They just seem to be concerted airstrikes, maybe 10, 15 bombs being dropped at a time. We have no idea what the targets are. We're not allowed in those sort of security areas, but there's a great intensity at this point, just on the horizon from where we are at the hotel here.
Millions of viewers all around the world heard your description last night of the bombing over Baghdad. Can you compare what was going on last night to what's going on today? Does it seem to be considerably lighter? Do these seem to be more surgical kind of strikes?
I think where these airstrikes are falling, it's as loud on the people there as they were here. Now, I think this morning they came in with selected targets within the inner city of Baghdad, and I'm talking about an oil refinery, chemical plant, communications plant, apparently the Defense Ministry. Now they're a little further out, just seemingly picking their targets. We've been out on the street. A few food stalls are open. We have had no reports at this point of any civilian casualties. We heard one siren only last night, and that was a fire engine. There doesn't seem to be any reports of much civilian casualties. I guess they are going after military targets, as the Pentagon keeps saying. And as I said, that is continuing as of now.
You said the skies are now owned by the Allied forces over Baghdad. Tell us what you hear in the way of anti-aircraft fire. I can't hear it behind your voice.
Well, I mentioned that I mentioned there was sort of diminished anti-aircraft fire. What we have is earlier this morning, when they were actually bombing targets that were relatively near our hotel, within a mile of them, the anti-aircraft was firing very rapidly. The presidential palace is relatively near. We had a gentleman came in from a peace group who was at a camp beside the presidential palace. He said the guns there were this AAA anti-aircraft artillery was firing into the sky. Now the Iraqis are claiming they maybe shot down 3 U.S. planes over the palace, but we have no confirmation of that, and of course the U.S. has denied those reports. I have heard scattered anti-aircraft fire in the past half hour, but as I said, the bombing is quite some distance from us, so it's easier for us to hear the tremendous explosions from the bombs. It is harder for us to pick up the lighter reports of the flak going up, Molly.
All right, that's CNN's Peter Arnett reporting for us live this morning from Baghdad. We'll be going back to him momentarily. First, Rick.
All right, Molly, now let's find out what the word is from the Pentagon this morning, and for that we join CNN's Jeff Levine live at the Pentagon. Jeff, are they saying anything there about these Baghdad radio reports of American planes being shot down?
Good morning, Rick. The word we have about those reports is one word, and that word is ridiculous. A Pentagon official says today that he can't confirm anything like that, but ultimately such a claim sounds on the face to be ridiculous. As to another report that was on the wires earlier, that coalition ground forces were advancing toward Kuwait, no one here could confirm that. In fact, Pentagon officials are being intentionally vague about the details of the operation. That situation will hopefully mitigate somewhat at the morning briefing. The briefing has slipped back a bit. It's now thought that will take place about 9 or 10, and that will give officials here an opportunity to review some of the intelligence data to determine more precisely what happened. We expect that someone from the Joint Chiefs of Staff will conduct the briefing. And while it's not exactly clear what did take place, apparently there were some impressive successes during the operation, as CNN's Wolf Blitzer reports.
As U.S. Air Force F-15 Eagles returned to their bases in Saudi Arabia, Pentagon officials said they were very pleased by the initial word from military commanders on the scene.
I will simply say that the preliminary reports we have received in terms of the success of the operation, and that includes the possibility of casualties, have been very, very encouraging. The operation appears to have gone very well.
Cheney said hundreds of fighter bombers and other aircraft from the U.S., Britain, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait participated in the initial strike. Other officials said much of the Iraqi Air Force appeared to have been destroyed on the ground. They say very few Iraqi planes even managed to get off the ground to challenge the invading U.S. aircraft.
Well, the biggest thing I saw was one of the most fantastic fireworks demonstrations I've seen since 4th of July party years and years and years ago. This was tremendous. Baghdad was lit up like a Christmas tree. Looked like everything in downtown was, fireworks were going off, a lot of AAA, impacts on the ground. I think we hit there just about the time we're 40 miles south is when they're pounding targets in Baghdad.
The purpose of our bombing facilities in the area of Baghdad is essentially to go after the command and control system of the Iraqi armed forces, and we're looking at principally military targets, command and control installations, air defense sites that could put our planes at risk, but they are militarily oriented targets.
The Pentagon said it had no evidence that the Iraqis had managed to launch any of their Scud ballistic missiles. Privately, officials said all of the fixed-site Iraqi ballistic missile sites appeared to have been knocked out, and they say the U.S. and Allied air power also destroyed Iraq's nuclear and chemical weapons facilities. But some on Capitol Hill were cautious in their initial reaction to the optimistic assessment coming from the Pentagon.
I'm still skeptical. I mean, put me down as skeptical. I think that you're going to need a ground attack, that this thing is going to be weeks, not days, that we're still going to need, we're going to have some casualties here. In other words, don't let this optimism here, don't let it carry you away.
For Pentagon officials, though, word that the U.S. airstrikes crushed a big chunk of the elite Iraqi Republican Guard forces was especially encouraging. They say there are no immediate plans to move in U.S. ground forces into Kuwait. But if that is still necessary, the weakening of the Republican Guards should ease any such assault. Wolf Blitzer, CNN, the Pentagon.
Still no word at this hour of American or coalition casualties. Jeff Levine, CNN, reporting live from the Pentagon.
Jeff, if we have time for one quick question before you go, what about the reports of ground fighting, of Iraqi shelling, of even Iraqi soldiers surrendering? Are you getting any reports like that at the Pentagon this morning?
Well, we are checking those reports, Rick, and they cannot confirm them, although it has been widely reported, and indeed the Secretary of Defense and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff indicated earlier, of course, that the initial phases were to be an air war, so one would have to be a little bit surprised at this hour that there could be a large-scale ground operation. No one here is confirming anything like that, and we may find out more at the morning briefing. Rick?
All right, thanks, Jeff. Jeff Levine reporting live from the Pentagon. Molly?
Of course, those attacking Allied aircraft are coming and going from bases in Saudi Arabia. For an update on activity there, we go to CNN's Rick Salinger. He's in eastern Saudi Arabia. Rick, what can you tell us this morning?
The latest information we're getting here concerns some ground fighting near the border of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, in particular about an attack by the Iraqis on an oil refinery that is at Khafji. The information that we have now comes from a high Saudi source who spoke with CNN, and what he said is this: last night, the Iraqis opened up with about 40 artillery rounds aimed at that refinery. Of those 40 rounds, only one round struck its target. And what it hit was a half-filled gasoline storage tank. That tank is reported to be burning. Now, the same Saudi official also spoke about what you were speaking of just a few moments ago. He said that about 50 Iraqi tanks have thrown up the white flag of surrender. However, I must emphasize that we have no independent confirmation of that. The Saudi official also said that some Iraqi soldiers aren't bothering to surrender, and what they are doing, perhaps quite ingeniously, is simply taking off their uniforms and putting on civilian clothes, trying to blend in with the local population. Meantime, the airstrike by the multinational force continues at a relentless pace. At an airbase that we can only say is somewhere in the Persian Gulf area, more than a dozen F-4 Wild Weasels took off on the moonless night about 1:26 in the morning. That is local Saudi Arabia time. An hour later, dozens more planes, Marine FA-18 fighter attack jets, took off from the same airstrip. Now, their mission was to knock out Iraqi surface-to-air missiles. Some of them flew directly into Baghdad and dropped their load. One pilot described it as like lighting up a Christmas tree down below. Yes, they did receive some resistance, in particular from what they call AAA, that's anti-aircraft artillery, but all of the planes returned to their bases safely. One more thing to add at this hour. A short time ago, I spoke with a Kuwaiti official here in eastern Saudi Arabia, and he expressed his pleasure that the liberation of his country is now taking place, but at the same time, he expressed his deep concern for the 350,000 Kuwaitis who remain behind in his country, and also for the Iraqi civilians as well. Reporting live from eastern Saudi Arabia, I'm Rick Salinger.
Thanks, Rick. CNN's Richard Roth is in Tel Aviv, an Israeli city that has apparently escaped any retaliatory attack by the Iraqis. Richard, what can you tell us?
Well, there's a large sense of relief here in Tel Aviv. The sun is out, shining bright. Streets are empty, though, here in this city. Some stores are, opening, but the majority are closed tight. The government has ordered everybody in Israel to stay indoors, open their gas mask kit, keep them nearby. Of course, Saddam Hussein had threatened to make Tel Aviv his first target should he be attacked by the U.S.-led forces. Now, we talked to several people who did venture out. Some said they were bored. Some said they had to go to work. That's why they were, quote, violating the government order, though it's doubtful there will be any punishment for that. Several people had high praise for the U.S. and the U.S. flyers who participated in the raid on Baghdad. One man said the U.S. forces have restored world order. Another woman said, though, that she was still very scared, and we checked out a Civil Defense Authority center where thousands of calls were coming in. People wanted more information, how to wear their mask, what to do, is the coast clear, you might say. One man who said things are definitely not safe yet, former Israeli Prime Minister and former Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who told CNN that the first strike was very successful by the U.S., but they need complete air superiority and that the situation is still very much unsettled. and many people in the Israeli government will tell you that. Officials, including Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, had prior warning of the U.S. attack that occurred early this morning, and they seem pleased with the level of U.S. cooperation and coordination on information regarding the raid. There were curfews that were placed on West Bank towns and parts of East Jerusalem by the authorities. Officials are concerned that the Palestinians who support Saddam Hussein might stage further uprisings. Those Palestinians, some of whom received gas masks in the last few days, courtesy of an order by the Israeli Supreme Court that everyone, including the occupied territory, should be allowed to have a gas mask, and nearly 200,000 were passed out. And now it remains to be seen whether these gas masks that everyone has will end up being used. People here are breathing a big sigh of relief. It appears that Saddam is not going to strike. He may not have any missile capability, but people here are still taking it very cautiously and are remaining inside their homes. The streets are empty. Newspaper headlines proclaiming a war, and U.S.-led forces have attacked Iraq. One man said, though, in response to a question on what did he think about Saddam Hussein's boast that he would make Tel Aviv the first target, he said, that's the first and the last joke he's heard on the matter. Richard Roth, CNN, reporting live from Tel Aviv.
All right, thanks very much, Richard. Rick Moore?
Okay, Molly, let's go back to Baghdad and see what the situation there is now. Peter, I'm sure you've heard the reports of what Baghdad radio is saying about their success in fighting the coalition forces. What do you make of all that?
We're still trying to assess those reports, but we can give you a bomb damage assessment in the city. Some fellow journalists have just returned from a tour, and we can confirm that the Iraqi Defense Ministry took 3 direct hits. One wing of the 3-wing building is burning, and the soldiers standing across the street, they're not doing much about it. One part, the second wing of the building was flattened totally, and the 3rd wing is standing. That's the Iraqi Defense Ministry. Also, President Saddam Hussein's Socialist Ba'ath Party headquarters has taken a hit on the roof. I think the bomb went right into it. Interestingly enough, we are told by our colleagues who have been driving around that the Baghdad airport has been untouched. The airport terminal is standing. There are 2 or 3 Iraqi Airlines passenger planes there. So the airport is open. I don't know if that's some kind of signal, but the airport is opening and apparently could function. This is Peter Arnett reporting live from Baghdad.
All right, Peter, before you go, I know one of the CNN staffers earlier during all of this evening saw Saddam Hussein at the TV center there. Do you know, with this bombing going on, where he has been, where he is now?
That's all we have. Our staffer, Nick Robinson, was over there trying to establish communications, satellite communications. At the TV station, Saddam Hussein did come by. He looked grim and resolute. He was apparently taping a message, but that's all we have seen of him. But it's the first time I've actually seen him in public for the past week or so. But he is around the city, Bob.
This is Rick Moore, Peter. The presidential palace, if he were there, what kind of shape is it in now?
We have an eyewitness who was from a peace group, a European peace group that was camped near the presidential palace, and he told us that while there was a tremendous anti-aircraft fire going skywards from the palace, and the Iraqis are claiming they shot down 3 U.S. planes, a report denied by the U.S., he said there was no bombing of the presidential palace. He said the nearest bombing at that point was a few miles upriver, where there was a huge oil refinery on an island in the Tigris River, which he said was totally destroyed. In the early hours of this morning, we actually did witness that oil refinery blowing up, Rick.
All right, Peter, it's early afternoon there in Baghdad now. What is the scene? What are you seeing now as you look out the window? Is the bombing continuing? What's going on?
Every 10 or 15 minutes, the bombers do return. Just 15 minutes ago, the planes were over the city. We couldn't see them. I don't know what particular make of aircraft they were, but they were very noisy. They were swooping down. We could hear them. There was limited anti-aircraft fire from the city that apparently just made bombing runs to the south. Explosions we could hear and vaguely see on the horizon, but this bombardment doesn't seem by any means over, but it does seem to be moving out beyond Baghdad now to the perimeter of the north, south, east, and west, but there's been little in the last hour or two towards the city center, Rick.
All right, Peter. Okay, Peter, we're going to interrupt. We'll be coming back to you shortly. We have just received unedited videotape. We understand this is a briefing that occurred before the raid, a briefing for the 82nd Airborne.
in my opinion, long overdue.
How would you describe everybody's reaction here? It seems calm.
I think in some cases it was a relief to some of the personnel who have been here and had built up much anxiety over the months.
Can I get your rank, your first name, and your last name?
CW3, Jim Keesee. Better spell it. K-E-E-S-E-E.
Okay, could I get your rank, your first name, and your last name, please?
CW3, Theodore Pemberton.
How do you spell Pemberton?
P-E-M-B-E-R-T-O-N.
Where were you this morning when you found out about this? What was your initial reaction?
I was on my way to the bathroom. 2:30 in the morning. And I found out that we had been involved in an airstrike for 35 minutes.
And your initial reaction?
My initial reaction. We're going to war. That's about it.
What's your job? How could it affect you?
Oh, just like everyone else here, I'm a logistician. We make sure the guys have what they need, and we take that very seriously. And that's our job. Get them what they need to get this thing over with as soon as possible.
Everybody seems to be taking it very calmly. Do you notice any difference in anybody, or perhaps are people taking everything more seriously?
Well, most of these guys here have been in the Army for 18, 20, 22 years. And we've seen this type of stuff in one form or another. So it's our job, and we try to do our job as professionally as we possibly can. And to get upset about something that we do every day doesn't serve any purpose. So this is, we fight as we train. And I guess that's about all I can say.
Okay, thank you. I do something about that bag. Figure out how to make it work.
As we mentioned when we first started watching this is being fed into us live at CNN here in Atlanta. We're taking this as a live feed from Saudi Arabia, unedited U.S. pool tape. The voice you heard, Jim Clancy, who is with CNN, just happened to be the pool reporter on this. These are members of the 82nd Airborne Division. Interviews with a couple of the members, Airman Keesee and Pemberton, that you possibly heard just a few minutes ago, their reactions to what it was like when they were first awakened or first notified that war was indeed underway. And this is apparently more members of the 82nd Airborne Division and what apparently is a ready room or assembly room. We're not sure exactly when, what time this video was made. We think it was taken before the actual raid on Baghdad. Various guys sitting around. Jim Clancy was with them at that time. Jim, I understand you can hear us now. You're on the phone with us. Jim Clancy?
Right. What you've been looking at is members of the 82nd Airborne having breakfast this morning, reacting to the news that Operation Desert Shield has given way to Operation Desert Storm. You saw a lot of backpacks there, other bags. Those contain all of their chemical suits. Now, those are the full suits that would be worn. They're with them there as they sit and eat breakfast. They're now required to have them with them 24 hours a day. That is in case the alert is increased and they have to put on that chemical weapons gear. Last night, these soldiers with the 82nd Airborne were told to begin taking some special tablets that will increase the resistance to the effects of nerve gas. Now, that could be a precaution that's taken in anticipation of any Iraqi chemical attack. At the same time, it could also help the troops' bodies gear up, if you will, for the possibility of engaging in ground combat where it's very likely that chemical weapons could be used. A lot of the soldiers that we talked with this morning said that they were happy that it had come to this. They believe that as the bullets start flying, that it's really the countdown for them to go home. Some of the troops in the very early hours, the cooking staff, like this young man that's preparing French toast, he said they found out about it. They were at work. They've been listening to radios, monitoring it. Of course, the 82nd Airborne played a key role in the invasion of Panama, and they feel a little bit out of it at this point. They're just sitting, waiting, and watching for what the developments in the air war may mean for them. They already know that they've got to increase their supplies. Kitchens like this one might have to be moved on short notice. All of these things could, the whole situation is very fluid for them. Things could change in a moment's notice. So that's what we're looking at right now. We
Jim,
talk with them.
What is the specific role of these members of the 82nd Airborne Division? Have they actually gone into any battle yet at this point?
Well, absolutely not. We have heard some reports that ground units have been moved up and engaged. From what we know, this is untrue, at least for this unit. And, of course, there have been no injuries or anything like that reported with the 82nd Airborne. They are standing by. We will see on later tape some of them packing up their kit gear and things like that. Like many of the other soldiers, the ground forces here in Saudi Arabia, they're standing by waiting to hear what their orders might be.
Pardon my ignorance, Jim, but I'm wondering, the 82nd Airborne, are these paratroopers?
Absolutely. These, one of the last units of the U.S. Army that would actually drop by parachutes in. It's been rumored that these might be the men that would go into Kuwait City, but of course they could play many different roles. They're a very qualified, capable fighting force. As I said earlier, they were involved in Panama, and they're used to a lot of action. They expect to see a lot of action. They've got armor that can be dropped in, artillery that can be dropped in, very mobile, capable force backed up by Apache attack helicopters and heavier helicopters, but they are actually a parachute force.
Jim, we heard parts of a couple of interviews you did with a couple of these soldiers. What was the overall feeling, the overall attitude about these young men who are preparing to possibly go to war soon?
Well, I think we're going to hear here in just a couple of more minutes, they had a feeling of relief. They think that all of this signals the fact that they may be counting down the hours, the days, the weeks, until they'll be able to go back home. And they very much want to do that. They're very interested in being able to get back and see their families. By the way, this unit was deployed on the 18th of August out here in the desert. They jokingly referred to themselves for some time as speed bumps. They've been really involved from the very first days of they were the U.S., the initial response of the United States to the invasion of Kuwait. They were moved in to help protect Saudi Arabia when it looked like they were going to be invaded. Here are some more of the interviews.
Jim, I'm sorry we're not hearing sound on this at this moment.
So has there been a lot of talk in the news on
here we go.
No, not much of it. I just heard that they bombed. That was it. That's basically what we heard.
So you were at work at the time?
Yes, I was.
What's your reaction to that?
It's about time. Most everybody's pretty like, I don't know. Everybody wanted the war to start so the sooner the war starts, the sooner we can go home. So that's basically what everybody was saying.
You worried?
Huh? No, not too much. From what I hear about Iraq, no, I'm not that worried about them.
Sure.
I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I need your first name, your last name, and your rank.
Okay. Alex Morgan.
M-O-R-G-A-N.
Airborne.
And your rank?
PFC.
Okay. Alex, where were you this morning? Were you at work here already preparing breakfast? What was going on?
I was at work, and I heard over the radio broadcast that everything got started, and I heard that we was taking them out slowly but surely, and hopefully it continues that way.
How about your own reactions?
I was really not surprised, but it was a good feeling to know that we made the first move and sort of got things accomplished.
Okay, that's good. Nobody's going to be on it more in about 15 seconds. This goes to all in.
Hi, lovely. I want to say hi to my mom.
help you, buddy.
I'm part of the team here. Yeah, part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Everybody got one. Let's see your hands. Let's see your hands.
A lot of these are wondering the last opportunity they might have on breakfast. Once again, they don't know if the might be called in, might be evidence
Right, again, we've been watching pool video. This is the 82nd Airborne Division. They are having breakfast just after they were notified that Iraq had been attacked by U.S. forces. Some were already up cooking, as you heard. You can tell the morale is high, their spirits are up, and it seems their spirits are even higher after the reports of the attack on Baghdad. Jim Clancy was the pool reporter talking several members of the 82nd Airborne Division in this unedited U.S. pool tape.
It is 5:30 in the morning in Washington, D.C. The lights have been burning all night at the State Department. CNN's Francis Hardin is there. Francis, what can you tell us, and is an official briefing planned from that quarter?
Good morning, Molly. The Secretary of State will begin his day bright and early with a 7:30 meeting at the White House. That meeting will include the National Security Advisor, Brent Scowcroft, and the Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney. It is also quite likely that President Bush will attend that meeting as well. The subject, of course, will be the Gulf War. Baker, as an old friend and trusted confidant of the president, will of course continue to play an important role in the execution of this war. But in a very real sense, the action moved out of this building when diplomacy failed to dislodge the forces of Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. Wednesday, in the hours before the attack, Baker spent much of his time notifying the allies of this country's intentions. That notification also included getting permission, a green light, if you will, from King Fahd of Saudi Arabia. The response from the allies to this country's notification was good luck and God bless you. But from Iraq, there has been no communication save the bellicose speech just a short time ago by Saddam Hussein on the radio. I'm Francis Hardin, CNN, live from the State Department.
Okay, Francis. Let me ask you, even as Baghdad is being bombed, do you have any indication from the State Department that there might be any sort of continued communication with Baghdad in any way, one more chance to get Saddam Hussein to back down?
Molly, let me tell you what the State Department said the other day when reporters posed that same sort of question to Margaret Tutwiler, the department spokesperson. The question was asked, what can be done after the deadline? What happens on January 16th, 17th, 18th? And she said at that time that the deadline was very real. At the same time, there was still the possibility hinted at that if Saddam Hussein wants to talk, this time after he's been sort of softened up with some bombs, that the door is open and they're willing to talk. But of course those conditions still remain, and those conditions are the 12 resolutions passed by the UN Security Council. And of course from the United States point of view, one of the things that it will not do is link any kind of proposition in the Gulf with an international conference to resolve the Palestinian crisis. They don't want that linked to the current situation in the Gulf.
CNN's Francis Hardin at the State Department. We thank you for that, Rip.
All right, Molly, we're going to take a look back now with CNN's Mark Leff as Mark reports on what has led us from Operation Desert Shield to what is now Operation Desert Storm.
Hours after aircraft from 4 nations pounded Iraqi targets in the middle of the night, some members of the 28-nation alliance were loading up and heading back for yet another round of air attacks. And so far, the official word is that all U.S. and British pilots returned safely from the nighttime raids.
I think there was one SAM fired that I saw, but it was so far away and up through the smoke and haze, it was hard to make it out.
So nothing came close to you?
No, but that's the beauty of the system. We can stay far enough away that that's not going to be a problem for us, from the SAMs anyway. The bullets are the ones that scare me.
It looks a lot like, you know, lights. Flickering lights like Christmas lights or something like that when the AAA's coming up. And then shortly after that it looks like some big bomb fireworks or something like that going off. It was an awesome display, it truly was.
While all U.S. planes reportedly returned from the first bombing runs without being hit, The French defense minister says Iraqi ground fire did hit 4 of 12 French Jaguar planes attacking a military airfield in Kuwait. So far, reports indicate only minor resistance from Iraqi forces, a handful of missiles fired toward Saudi Arabia falling short of their targets. 2 empty oil tanks reported hit in what used to be the neutral zone between Iraq and Saudi Arabia. From Tokyo, an Arabian oil company official reported damage to a small refinery that handles the output of 2 oil fields. It's not clear whether it's the same one. CNN reporters in the Iraqi capital say some damage is visible from their center city vantage point, clouds of smoke covering part of the city, but they saw at least 1 anti-aircraft battery with radar still functioning. The British Broadcasting Corporation reports at least 3 bombs hit the Iraqi Defense Ministry. Iraq's President Saddam Hussein was at Iraqi television headquarters early Thursday morning and broadcast a message to U.S. President George Bush, telling him to withdraw U.S. and allied forces. Iraqi radio, meanwhile, reported the air raids were aimed at residential areas, a statement Britain's Prime Minister quickly countered.
Immense trouble has been taken, of course, to ensure that it is military targets that are the target of this attack, and an enormous amount of effort and care has got into ensuring that there are the minimum possible number of civilian casualties.
Majors said the operation, which reportedly has hit Iraqi troops and military equipment hard, will continue. And in Israel, which did not get the instant retaliation Saddam Hussein had promised, a former defense minister said the danger is not over yet.
You don't win a war by the first strike, unless there will be a continuation of your air activities to establish air supremacy. It will be very difficult to approach the next phase, the uprooting of the Iraqi forces from Kuwait.
Mark Leff, CNN, reporting.
We understand that part of the time that Baghdad was being bombed, President Bush was getting some sleep overnight. We assume that he is now awake and alert. And at the White House, CNN's Frank Sesno is there as well. Frank, can you tell us what sort of activity you expect there today?
Well, it's unclear. There's nothing precisely scheduled yet. I don't know if the president is, in fact, up and has been briefed. But the way the scenario was played out here is that the Situation Room here at the White House will be in constant contact via the Pentagon and other official organizations to get information back from the field. And through National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft, the president will be kept abreast of developments. Just exactly how closely he followed them through the early hours of this morning are unclear at this time. Secretary of State James Baker and Defense Secretary Dick Cheney are expected here at the White House for breakfast this morning at 7:30 with National Security Advisor Scowcroft and presumably the president as well, although that is somewhat vague at this time. There may also be some congressional briefings, if not here at the White House, then on Capitol Hill. Now, the reason some of this is up in the air is all of this broke last night over the White House staff, pretty much, except for the very top ranks of the White House staff, as it broke over the rest of the nation. Indeed, many White House staffers returned to the White House to at least watch their televisions, and they were informed over their televisions as many Americans were. This was a very tightly held operation, the very tightest circle of the president's advisors. He signed the National Security Directive giving authorization for this operation, giving the go-ahead for it on Tuesday, leaving the dates blank. The actual final signature for the green light go was put to the documents by Defense Secretary Cheney. Molly?
Frank, in the early morning hours of this morning, we have heard live from John Major, Prime Minister John Major in Great Britain. We've also heard on tape from Mikhail Gorbachev. Who has President Bush spoken to? Any confirmation of what world leaders he's consulted with?
Well, Gorbachev spoke to Secretary of State Baker. That's the word from Gorbachev himself. The president was in a great deal of contact prior to the mission with British Prime Minister John Major. Britain is the major operational ally outside the immediate Gulf states with the United States in this whole thing. The president also spoke with the Australian Prime Minister, Bob Hawke. here domestically, Mr. Bush informed the congressional leadership personally that this operation was underway and left to the ranking chair and committee members of the Intelligence, Armed Services and Appropriations Committee notification responsibilities, to his Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State. So there has been a great deal of top-level discussion going on, and I can presume that that will continue throughout the day.
All right, that's CNN's Frank Sesno reporting live for us this morning from what is sure to become a very busy place today, the White House. The outbreak of war has had a profound effect on the world business markets. For an update on that, we go to Stuart Varney. Stuart?
Well, Molly, stock prices all around the world have soared on the apparent success of the initial airstrikes. Let's start with London, where the market has been open for a couple of hours now, and it's up sharply. The FT100 index shows a gain of 42.5 points. It's at 2,097. That's a gain of 2%. Most European stock markets also way up at the opening bell. The Paris index is now up 5.5%. Frankfurt and Milan up just as much. Stock markets in the Pacific Rim, they're closed, but all of them showed very strong gains. Leading the way, Tokyo, it had its 10th best day ever. The Nikkei index gained 1,000 points, that's 4%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng index gained over 3%. In Australia, the index in Sydney was up better than 2.5%, and the Singapore stock market closed with a gain of 5.5%. As for oil, it has been trading on the London market overnight, and the price has plunged on the war news. At the moment, Britain's North Sea crude is down $5.35 a barrel. It's back to $23.65. On the credit markets, the bellwether 30-year U.S. government bond also trades in London, and it is way up in price, a gain of 2 1/32. That is a massive gain on the credit markets, by the way, and it's pushed the yield all the way down to 8.21%. As for the dollar, lower against all the major currencies, and the price of gold has plummeted. It's now down $21.70 an ounce. It's back to $381.50. We'll have more financial news in 1 hour. Until then, I'm Stuart Varney at the Business News Desk in New York.
Thanks, Stuart. We're going back to Baghdad now. Peter Arnett, of course, is there. Peter, what can you tell us?
Well, the skies are quiet. They have been for the last 30 minutes. We don't expect them to be quiet much longer. About every hour there's been a new strike in the environs of Baghdad, basically on the outskirts of the city. We can tell you, give you a bomb damage assessment, that the Defense Ministry was hit by 3 bombs. One wing is burning, one was collapsed totally, another is still standing, and there were no fire engines trying to put it out a couple of hours ago. The telecommunications center was hit. Interestingly enough, the Socialist Ba'ath Party headquarters, that's the party of President Saddam Hussein, took a direct hit. So that was not a strategic, it was presumably a political target. Interesting enough also, our colleagues tell us that the Baghdad airport was not hit. The terminal is still standing. There are several Iraqi airlines planes out there. Maybe that's a message for either to fly people to fly in or out, but that particular airport was not hit. As I said, the bombing is continuing. In the early hours of the morning, we saw an oil refinery in the Tigris River go up in a huge explosion, and there is a chemical plant. That was hit just north of us. Now, when I mentioned the airport, they may have hit the military side of the airport, but from what we can see, the civilian side is operable at this point. This is Peter Arnett reporting live from Baghdad.
Peter? Before you go, we continue to get reports that the Iraqis are saying they have downed 14 Allied aircraft. What do you hear about that?
We hear the same reports that you hear. We can confirm that in the first 4 or 5 hours of this massive aerial bombardment, there was an enormous amount of anti-aircraft fired into the sky, surface-to-air missiles and AAA, that's the anti-aircraft artillery into the sky, soldiers on the streets shooting up there. We could not see any hits. A lot of these planes are flying very high. We cannot confirm any hits on American or other planes from here. Peter Arnett again in Baghdad.
Peter, are you able to get out, or any of our crew able to get out into the city at all, or is it just too dangerous at this point in time?
I can report that the city really is not dangerous. It is, while there is bombing, it seems to be directed, as I said, now in the outskirts of the city. Our colleagues, Marie Colvin from the Sunday Times is here. She has just come back for an extensive visit to different parts of the city. She says that there are militia people out armed, but there are passers-by walking around. She said that the city has been basically emptied of people, but we might say unofficially, in the past two or 3 days. The government did say it could evacuate Baghdad in 48 hours. Now, there's been no evacuation order that we know, but a lot of people have gone. And on the streets today, there are taxis loaded with luggage and families sort of hitchhiking around. It is said that there is little resentment against, international journalists walking around. So everything considered, the city must be said to be calm. And at one point, no cameras, none of our video cameras are allowed out in the street. So while we can walk around, we aren't permitted at this point to take pictures. Peter Arnett in Baghdad.
All right, but isn't it interesting, Peter, that they continue to let CNN be on the air in Baghdad and around the world? Rick?
Molly, let's get another view on all of this overnight activity in the war in the Persian Gulf. Joining us now live from our bureau in Jerusalem is Mr. Faisal Hassani, who is a Palestinian leader in Israel. And first, Mr. Hassani, let me ask you, if you believe that the media reports that we on CNN are giving and the other media reports are accurate in that the bombing has been as effective as they say it has?
Actually, toward what we were seeing, watching, and hearing, there were some news which came contrary with others. So I prefer to wait more and then to answer your question.
Are you surprised at this point that Saddam Hussein did not live up to his promise and attack Israel?
Actually, I was surprised that the war started this night. And from the beginning, I was not in a mood that such a war will start, because I believe that the war will help no one. Unfortunately, it started.
Now that it has started, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think there can be a swift conclusion to this, that there can be peace in the immediate future in that area?
I don't know, really. In the beginning, we were for a political solution. We fought for a political solution because we believe that military one will help no one, and after such a war, the Middle East will enter in a period of instability, which will cost everyone a very high price. Now we are hoping that someone will stop this war and start dealing and start reaching to a political solution. The main point for us as a Palestinians to see that the international legitimacy is implemented, but what we are fear that the Americans are not fighting for the international legitimacy, but they are fighting for the oil.
What about the situation that apparently held up any prospects for a peaceful solution before the war? President Saddam Hussein kept trying to link the situation in Kuwait with the situation for a Palestinian state. Do you think that is possible now?
I believe that this linkage is there. No one creates the linkage. I would like to assume with me that Iraq accepted the idea of withdrawal from Kuwait. Would the Americans and the West accept this withdrawal and that's it? Or they will ask him to reduce his forces, to get rid of the chemical weapons, to get rid of the idea of atomic bomb? Would they talk about the security of the area? And in this case, can he do such a thing without talking also about the security in the Middle East, in this area, talking about the atomic bomb of Israel? So I believe the linkage is there. No one created the linkage. Unfortunately, the Americans take this idea in another way, and they thought that if they will go with it, they are giving a price for Saddam Hussein, which is not true. I believe that if the Americans accepted this idea, they were giving a price for the whole people of the Middle East.
On the other hand, there is another point, Mr. Husseini. The PLO in Lebanon has called for a general mobilization among Palestinians in Lebanon to attack U.S. and British interests worldwide. What is your response to that?
Look, I can say that it is a war, and during this war, each one will put his forces to the side that he believes it will help his interest. We are for that in this occasion.
Mr. Husseini, there has not been peace in modern times in that region of the world, and when Israel was separated as a state in 1948, when that state was created, there was an immediate war. If the Palestinians should get their state, what would happen? Where would it go?
Okay, you know that in 1948, at the end of 1948, the Palestinians tried to build their own state through the Palestinian meeting in Gaza. But unfortunately, other Arab states opposed it and forbidden us from building our own state. I believe in 1948, if the Palestinians have been allowed to build their own state, maybe the future or the present of this area will be better than now.
Okay, Mr. Husseini, thanks very much for being with us. Mr. Faisal Husseini, a Palestinian leader at our CNN bureau in Jerusalem. Molly?
Thank you.
CNN's Tony Clark is in Amman, Jordan today. Tony, has anything been said by Jordan's King Hussein?
The king has talked just through spokesman on the phone, but I don't recall any specific statement by the king. The Jordanians found out about this by Jordan radio and television early this morning. Since that time, as Amman has awakened, there has been a definite worsening of attitudes, an increase of tensions here. This morning, the Egyptian ambassador's residence had rocks thrown at it. There is increased security around the American embassy. No reports of anyone hurt either at the Egyptian ambassador's residence or at the U.S. embassy. There is an unconfirmed report that 4 journalists were injured as they were out covering a story. Again, that is an unconfirmed report, but there apparently has been some type of incident because the Jordanian government is now saying that they will not issue any more passes to journalists. We get letters of authorization every day that allow us to go out and shoot video of the area or interview people. The Jordanian government is now no longer issuing those, and in some cases has withdrawn those. According to the government, it is for the protection of the journalists because feelings are running so high here in Jordan.
Latest news of the attack on Iraq. The bold red headline reads, "War is here." And on the streets of Amman, it's clear who many here support.
We like Saddam Hussein. We don't like America. Don't like America. America and Israel together.
It is a war between the devil and God. We are of God. We are believe in God, but they believe in devil.
For us, it is a national war.
But it is also a national war for Kuwaiti refugees living in Jordan. For them, it is a war for their homeland. Radio and television reports were their only link to what's happening in their country.
Saddam Hussein, he wanted to know about that. He want war? Okay. We want war also.
The war started in August the 2nd. And not today. And the guy who started the war is Saddam Hussein.
For many Kuwaitis here, word that the bombing had started brought mixed feelings.
I was crying and happy at the same time. I can't express my feeling to you because I was crying for my family in Kuwait, for the Iraqi people also in Iraq, and I was happy because I want to see my country free.
It was 3 in the morning when Jordan radio first announced in Arabic that the fighting had begun. At the U.S. Embassy in Amman, embassy personnel came to work prepared for what may well be a long stay, and Americans living in Jordan were told not to venture out. By mid-morning, Jordanian soldiers appeared to be digging in, setting up positions in Amman in case the fighting sweeps into this country. There are some reports, unconfirmed reports, that bombs fell in a neutral zone between the Jordanian and Iraqi border. The Jordanian government could not confirm exactly where those bombs may have fallen. The bombs reportedly from U.S. warplanes. There are also reports that an Iraqi base near the Jordanian border is on fire after a heavy bombardment. That base is believed to be the center of missiles that were pointed at Israel. Right now, as I say, the tension is increasing here in Jordan. Everyone is watching to see what Israel does, watching to see what the pro-Iraqi Palestinians and Jordanians will do now that the Persian Gulf crisis has become the Persian Gulf War. I'm Tony Clark, CNN, reporting live from Amman.
Tony, there's obviously great anger in Jordan over the bombing of Baghdad, but is there any real fear that war could spread into Jordan?
The key is perhaps what Israel does. If Iraq is able to launch missiles, as Saddam Hussein has said, at Israel, and Israel has said it will retaliate, King Hussein of Jordan has been very clear that any Israeli jets flying over Jordan, any Israeli missiles flying over Jordan would be considered an act of war, and that could bring Jordan, which is wedged in between these two countries, bring it into the conflict.
All right, that's CNN's Tony Clark in Amman, Jordan, reporting for us live this morning. President Bush said last night there was little hope that Iraqi troops would leave Kuwait without being forced out. The president addressed the nation, listing the reasons why he felt it was necessary to go to war.
Our objectives are clear. Saddam Hussein's forces will leave Kuwait. The legitimate government of Kuwait will be restored to its rightful place, and Kuwait will once again be free. Iraq will eventually comply with all relevant United Nations resolutions, and then, when peace is restored, it is our hope that Iraq will live as a peaceful and cooperative member of the family of nations, thus enhancing the security and stability of the Gulf. Some may ask, why act now? Why not wait? The answer is clear. The world could wait no longer. Sanctions, though having some effect, showed no signs of accomplishing their objective. Sanctions were tried for well over 5 months, and we and our allies concluded that sanctions alone would not force Saddam from Kuwait. While the world waited, Saddam Hussein systematically raped, pillaged, and plundered a tiny nation, no threat to his own. He subjected the people of Kuwait to unspeakable atrocities, and among those maimed and murdered, innocent children. While the world waited, Saddam sought to add to the chemical weapons arsenal he now possesses an infinitely more dangerous weapon of mass destruction, a nuclear weapon. And while the world waited, while the world talked peace and withdrawal, Saddam Hussein dug in and moved massive forces into Kuwait. While the world waited, while Saddam stalled, more damage was being done to the fragile economies of the Third World, the emerging democracies of Eastern Europe, to the entire world, including to our own economy. The United States, together with the United Nations, exhausted every means at our disposal to bring this crisis to a peaceful end. However, Saddam clearly felt that by stalling and threatening and defying the United Nations, he could weaken the forces arrayed against him. While the world waited, Saddam Hussein met every overture of peace with open contempt. While the world prayed for peace, Saddam prepared for war.
The president reportedly signed the secret war directive on Tuesday, but left the date of implementation blank, giving Iraq's president a final day of grace to respond, but there was no word from Iraq.
Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev says he blames Saddam Hussein for the war in the Gulf. Mr. Gorbachev addressed his nation on the hostilities just a short time ago. The Soviet president says the Kremlin made a last-minute appeal to Hussein to withdraw just 1 hour before the U.S.-led military attack.
We express our deep sorrow that the military confrontation could not be averted. So I'm ready to emphasize one more time, we did everything possible to avert the conflict.
Mr. Gorbachev is now appealing to countries to prevent the war from spreading.
Here are some of the headlines from newspapers around the United States as war rages in the Gulf. From the New York Times, U.S. and allies open air war on Iraq, bomb Baghdad and Kuwaiti targets. No choice but force, Bush declares. From the Washington Post, U.S. allies launch massive attack against targets in Iraq and Kuwait. From the Atlanta Constitution, U.S. attacks the liberation of Kuwait has begun. And the New York Post headline screamed, war. U.S. jets blast Baghdad, Saddam's palace is hit.
President Bush is getting a huge outpouring of support from people in the United States for the way he is handling the Gulf War. In the latest CNN Gallup poll, 81% say they approve of his strategy, only 12% say they disapprove, and 7% say they do not know. 79% say they approve of the decision to fight, 15% say they disapprove, 6% say they do not know. And when asked how long they expect the fighting to continue, 17% said a few days, 39% said a matter of weeks, 23% said several months, 5% said hostilities could last a year or more, 16% said